Do you like having fun in your video games? That sounds like an absurd question, I know, but I think it's important to ask. Because games are treated as a business, there's an objective to make a lot of new releases be finely crafted Skinner boxes, focused on keeping you playing with rare loot drops and cutting-edge graphics. In addition to asking for more money for a game you've already paid for, using psychological conditioning to have your time rather than crafting an experience you can genuinely enjoy. My goal is to show you video games that I believe are more than that. This includes older games that might show their age but have unique aspects that fill the void other games haven't, or new releases that have a quality that make them more than just things to waste your time on. And one of those video games I'm replaying fits into the former category, and the subject of this Macho recommendation is Dragons Dogma, an action RPG that I've been having a total blast with and I would love to share with you. As I was replaying this game, a sequel has suddenly been announced in the works, which is pretty exciting to me, and by the end of this video, it might be for you too. My name here is Pollymacho, and it's about time to talk about Dragons Dogma, a dream video game. Dragons Dogma is a game focused on your character titled the Arisen, starting with the tutorial that takes place in another era and another time, and then transitioning to your custom character. You live in this quiet fishing village, and then a dragon arrives, eats your heart, and pieces out. And after your character wakes up, you discover you can live, which is pretty cool. And instead of taking it easy, because by all medical accounts you should be dead, your character instead picks a starting class and begins the adventure to reclaim your heart from the dragon. As you prepare to leave, it's revealed that being an Arisen is pretty sick, because accompanying you on this journey are pawns, humanoid-looking characters that will aid you on this quest. They're like androids in function, so don't look too deep into the ethics of fated servitude and enjoy the adventure. For many of my macho recommendations, there's a heavy emphasis on their stories that make them appealing, but Dragons Dogma is different. Granted, it's not horrible, but the story isn't very engaging to me. I wasn't super invested in it, though there were some great moments. I treat it more like a vehicle, taking you from moment to moment. But the reason why I'm recommending this to you is that it can be a total blast, which I believe comes down to the game's exciting take on role-playing games. Dragons Dogma was directed by Hideki Itsuno. Some of you may know that name, but if not, I got you covered. This is the absolute legend that was the head director for Devil May Cry 3, 4, and 5. He also directed Devil May Cry 2, but he was more of a replacement director rather than building it from the ground up. Thank you, Wikipedia. Devil May Cry is a series focused on stylish and mechanically satisfying combat. When you see high-level gameplay from the series, you probably go, "Whoa, is that allowed?" Much like I do. And what's really interesting is that while it does take inspiration from old-school RPGs like Dragon Quest, it also mixes in other influences like Oblivion, or even some of Capcom's other projects like Monster Hunter. And if you've played Monster Hunter, you might know where this is going. And the end product creates this role-playing game hybrid with action combat that is a total blast. Itsuno has stated that Dragons Dogma was a passion project, the game he wanted to make for years, and it shows. There are additions to gameplay that can be adequately explained in the most academic terms I can surmise. Very cool. Stuff like if you fight a large monster, you could grab onto it, scaling the beast and hitting specific points on its body, weakening the creature, and even having a chance to bring it down for your allies. An early example of this is the Chimera in the tutorial. It has 3 heads, 2 of them focused on magical attacks and 1 for melee. And you can silence the snake and goat heads to stop its opportunities to cast spells, or the Cyclops that can be targeted in its hands to drop its weapon. On the marketing side of games, there's usually a CGI trailer that makes the game look really cool and get you excited to play it, only for it to come out and the gameplay is nothing like how it looked in the trailer, being greatly over-exaggerated. Dragons Dogma is the closest I've seen to this, where the trailer looks impressive and the gameplay matches that level of hype. You can pick from various classes to fit whatever playstyle you want. My personal favorites are the Fighter and Warrior. Oh, shocker, the guy with Macho in his username likes melee classes, but I mean, they're so cool. You can pick skills for your classes and they can be both flashy and really practical. Like, if you told me if I played a melee character, one of my skills could be my character banging on his shield, getting the attention of enemies to attack him, or using my greatsword as an actual physical support weapon, allowing my allies to jump onto my sword so they can reach a larger opponent, I would say that sounds awesome, where do I sign? It's not just your character who does cool stuff too, the pawns fighting with you can really change the tide of battle, such as any mages imbuing the party with an element on their weapons, or my favorite action, if your enemy is humanoid, a pawn can grapple the enemy, yelling for you to strike while they're pinned. Because of the action focus, it makes combat engaging, with a good amount of flashiness that keeps fights interesting. Something else that's really interesting is the pawn system. At the start of the game, it will have you customize another character. This one acts as your central pawn. Think of them as a permanent party member. You can pick a class and treat them like an additional character, but where it gets spicy is how the game uses them. Besides helping you on your quests, your pawn can also be shared with other players, through the overworld or through the rift, the places where pawns gather. So in addition to your main pawn, you can hire 2 others. Whatever classes and vocations you're looking for, these hired pawns can offer additional advice to you and help you on quests if they've done them before with another Arisen. And the main pawn you have can learn as you progress through the game, from fighting enemies to discoveries on the map to even reading scrolls for strategies against bigger foes. And as the Arisen, when you're in a tavern, you can sit down with your pawn and give them a performance review, telling them how to act in combat or just reducing how often they talk, because the pawns will talk a whole lot. I definitely recommend swapping out hired pawns as soon as you reach a spike in difficulty. The pawn system is pretty sweet and a unique aspect of the game. Letting players use pawns from others adds this interesting personal connection to the party, not from a narrative of how each character is written differently, but rather how pawns shift across the board that is Dragons Dogma, until eventually the pieces fall into place, and then it's checkmate. The gameplay of Dragons Dogma is fantastic, but there's another aspect that makes it pretty sweet. That being, this game is open world. For the most part, the open world is pretty great. It features a day-night cycle that is really impacting because during nighttime exploration, undead and phantoms can show up on the roads, leading to the game feeling creepy as you hope for the sun to rise. Even during the daytime, enemies can ambush your party, leading to tough battles, bandits especially because they have warriors, archers, rogues, and sometimes mages that can provide support. And much like a romantic lead hoping to make the chemistry happen, a large monster can be in the neighborhood and stop by. One of my favorite moments of this was when my group and I fought goblins. One pawn grappled a creature and yelled to strike the finishing blow. When I made my way over, what else but a dragon shows up on the right of my screen, causing me to sprint as fast as my stamina bar will allow. The gameplay features quests much like other RPGs, and from what I've played, that comes to 2 types. The first is your narrative type, i.e. help me find a magical item, catch a thief, or invade an enemy stronghold. The second act more like challenges, giving you a large amount of XP and items for completing them in the background. This includes stuff like fighting 3 Cyclopses or killing 40 undead. For the latter type, you don't turn these into anyone, they just auto-complete when you fill the requirements. Quests in this game act as vehicles, opportunities for your party to check out locations you usually wouldn't, possibly meeting a new enemy type along the way, or gathering some new equipment. The open world feels its best with a linear structure, giving the illusion of this vast, expansive world, but subtly pointing you to locations to quests that act as their own adventures. But one of the best things about the narrative type quests is how sometimes they come back into the main story. In the hub city of Grand Soren, there was a quest from a dude named Stefan looking for a powerful grimoire. So after an hour or so, I stumble upon the tome, and before I make it back to the city, I get a dialogue box from one of my hired pawns suggesting something along the lines of, "This looks really powerful, if only we had 2 of them." That line was odd at first, until I remembered there was a guy who could make forgeries of items. So I went to this forager, made a copy of this book, and gave the dude the fake one. That ended the quest, and this wasn't stated in my quest options. I wanted to try this because my curiosity was piqued and was curious if the game would let me. And it did. And it got even better when hours later, after multiple sessions of recording footage, I got ordered to fight a griffin with some knights. This was a pretty taxing battle. We first had to lure the creature out with a goblin corpse. Then the creature reveals itself and leads to a cool battle. Then wounded, it flies away, leading to our group booking it to the fort it resides in. and after going through an entire ordeal to fight this creature, we finally face it in the arena. There's a handful of us left as the creature has been picking us off one by one. Suddenly, mid-combat, Stefan shows up. Apparently, he followed us here and has decided to lend the ancient magics we helped him obtain to defeat the Griffin. So in all of his glory, fire erupting from the tome, channeling his mana to help his friends, and then absolutely nothing happens. Stefan is in disbelief as combat goes on. Meanwhile, I'm laughing because the game surprised me by remembering how I completed the quest and weaved that into the main story. It makes the moment-to-moment of the game remarkable and unpredictable. Besides giving you XP, it makes the narrative quests more incentivizing, as you don't know how they'll play into the main plot. And what's so neat is that your gear feels like tools for adventuring. You actually pull out a lantern to light areas and attach it to your side, filling it when the light runs low and put it away when it's doused in water. It's one of the few games where those little details of lighting are essential. Or even customization details, like if you make a smaller character, they can crawl through tunnels, or if you're carrying a heavy load of gear, it makes them use more stamina to run, but it also has a positive effect of making wind harder to push you when walking in high altitude areas. These are small details, but I think they really go to show this game as a total passion project, where the developers are playing with conventions and mechanics in RPGs, having their own take of how to implement them, and in the process, making something so unique and fun. Dragons Dogma is a grand old time, but I can't in good conscience recommend it without giving you a heads up on some stuff that is, in the academic sense, poopy butt. So let's talk about that. And I think the best way to lead into this is by highlighting a moment encapsulating the Dragons Dogma experience. So on my way to a goblin fort, there's a tremendous amount of ground to cover between Grandthorn and this stronghold. My hired pawn recommends we take a shortcut through a quarry. I think, alright, that sounds great. So we make our way to the mining area and discover it's ambushed by goblins. After taking care of the goblins and about to enter the tunnel, we come across this spooked merchant who pleads with us to open the gate, making that shortcut accessible for him. We're going there anyway, so yeah, why not? Entering the area, we come across zombies and skeletons, then upon finding the shortcut, we meet an ogre. This thing packs a punch and has an interesting quirk where it gets excited over any female characters and then attacks them, and in my case, I had a female pawn that was also a mage. So most of the fight was trying to get the attention of the ogre while it was throwing hands at my healer. But after about 15 minutes, we won the fight. It was intense, but it was also fun, and now I'm ready to head back to the merchant, let him know we opened the gate, and have some downtime journeying to the stronghold. But as soon as I let him know about finishing, he then asks, "Hey, could you go clear out the entire cave of enemies, please?" And this is where it started to go downhill. I then, for a good 20 minutes, explored the cave, hoping to find the remaining enemies, and discover there is another ogre, with the same quirk of attacking female characters. And after doing another 15 minutes of the same combat encounter, we are finally rewarded for our efforts with another ogre, with the same characteristic of attacking female characters. And finally, after spending an hour in this horrible place, we make our way outside, finish the quest, and we can finally progress. I describe it like this as a joke, but it shows the problem with Dragons Dogma, which is that it gets repetitive. Large monster encounters and ambushes are great the first couple of times, but the problem is that they outstay their welcome. If you have a cool moment in the overworld, unless it was for a quest, chances are you're going to come across that same moment again and again. And speaking of again, you will be walking around the map a lot. You'll be traversing the same area many times, either to return from a quest or head to an inn, which wouldn't be too much of a problem if it wasn't for this detail. The game has a weight capacity for your character. While in some cases it is pretty cool, like reducing the wind's effects like I mentioned earlier, having a heavy load is more of a negative than a positive, because it makes stamina go by way quicker, and stamina is used in both combat abilities and sprinting. So when you're in the overworld, it's going to make traversal painfully slow, as your character will run out quickly, then have to take a breather before doing it again. It makes traveling feel grueling because the speed of which is dictated by your inventory. And the inventory system is just not fun. It's interesting how it acts as a trade-off between mobility and loot, but that doesn't make it good, especially because weight is calculated in hyper-specific detail. such as plants being 0.11 pounds per individual, and your equipment is also factored into this. And a lot of stuff that has a considerable weight can be used for weapon upgrades or armor, but you don't know which ones or when, so you may just hold on to them hoping that it will eventually be useful. It kills the flow of gameplay when you need to pick up 5 objects being 5 pounds each during a quest, but you reached your limit maximum and can't carry anymore, requiring you to go into your inventory and manage your spreadsheet of stuff. And what gets pretty tiring quickly is having to backtrack through the map. To counter this, the game has port crystals and fairy stones. Port crystals can make waypoints, allowing them to be options for teleportation, and fairy stones are a consumable that lets you teleport. Definitely stock up on these, and if you're playing the Dark Arisen version of the game, there's an eternal fairy stone in your storage area in Grand Soren. Dragons Dogma is a fun video game, but are you willing to put up with a large amount of repetition, an annoying inventory system, and slow traversal? That's only a question you can answer for yourself. Alright, so before this video ends, I want to offer some tips to make your experience as smooth as possible if it sounds like your thing. Okay, so the first one I've got for you is to follow the main quest until you reach the capital of Grand Soren. Explore the game however you wish, but if you follow the main quest at first, you'll get some experience and you'll have the option to change your vocation at the capital's inn. Second, while you're at the inn, check your storage if you're playing the Dark Arisen version of the game and take the Eternal Fairy Stone, which will let you freely teleport between the capital and the opening village of the game. You can also buy fairy stones as consumables, but they can be costly if used a lot, so if it's available, that Eternal Fairy Stone is great. Additionally, don't forget to use the port crystals on other spots of the map so you can teleport wherever you need to. Definitely space these out to cover as much ground as possible for your own personal network of teleportation. Now this one is super important. If combat seems very one-sided in the enemy's favor, there is no shame in booking it. Even your pawns and loading screens suggest that fleeing can be the best option sometimes, and there's no shame in that. Just get some better equipment and some levels, then come back and kick some ass. Also, it's a great idea to swap out hired pawns constantly. If you've played the Shin Megami Tensei games, treat them like you would demons. Swap them out at the first sign they're not being helpful as before. Play around with your team formations and experiment with what you like. In my experience, I totally recommend having a spellcaster in your party with some type of healing. Class-wise, you can't go wrong, so play whatever sounds cool to you. You can change your class for a fee at the end, so feel free to experiment. And those are all the tips I can think of. If anyone else has played this, feel free to cover anything I missed or corrections to help out new players. Dragons Dogma is a really cool RPG that is worthy of being a Macho recommendation. It's not perfect, but it does such a great job at what it's trying to do that I admire the attempt. If you're looking to play an RPG that feels like an incredible marketing cinematic, this is it. As always, the Steam link is in the description below. My name here is Pollymacho, and thanks a whole bunch for watching. If you want to be notified for future Macho recommendations or other videos I make, I'd be honored if you would subscribe. It's completely free. And if you have any suggestions for topics, feel free to share them in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Oh, also, Into Free is such a banger. It was the first opening for Dragons Dogma on the title sequence before the Dark Arisen changed it. Totally doesn't fit, but I love it regardless. Thanks for watching. See ya.